Welcome to Whispering Ages. Tonight, the air hangs heavy with fog, and somewhere beyond the mist the bell begins to toll. 12 slow, hollow chimes, each one echoing through the village of Mournfell, a village where superstition runs deeper than faith, and where every midnight ring means another soul has stopped breathing. But this time, something is different. Because when the villagers rush to the church tower, they find the bell still swinging and the bell ringer lying dead beneath it. A death that looks like an accident. A curse that feels too real. And two of the greatest minds in all of crime, Hercule Poirot and Miss Jane Marple, drawn together once more to unmask a murderer who hides behind the sound of salvation itself. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Whispering Ages, because each week we uncover another shadow, another whisper, another mystery that refuses to stay buried. And as always, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me, who do you think the killer is before the final toll of the bell? Now, settle in and listen closely, because tonight in Mournfell, the bell does not toll for prayer. It tolls for murder. The bell rang at midnight. A Hercule Poirot and Miss Jane Marple mystery. Chapter 1. The Village of Mournfell. The coastal train from London rattled to the gathering dusk, carrying Miss Jane Marple toward the village of Mournfell. She sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly as she watched the landscape transform from rolling hills to wind-swept moors, and finally to the stark, beautiful desolation of the Devon coast. "Excuse me, madam," said the conductor, a ruddy-faced man with concerned eyes. "You'll be getting off at Mournfell, then?" "Indeed I shall," Miss Marple replied with a gentle smile. The conductor shook his head. "Forgive me for saying so, but it's an odd time to be visiting that place, especially with winter coming on and the fogs rolling in from the sea." "Oh, is there something particular about Mournfell?" The man glanced around as though afraid of being overheard. "It's the bell, you see. The church bell. They say when it tolls 12 times at midnight, someone dies before dawn. Been that way for 200 years, or so the stories go." Miss Marple's blue eyes twinkled with interest. "How very gothic. But surely you don't believe in such things." "Believe or not, it happens regular enough. Last man what died after bell rang was old Tom Reed, just 3 nights past. Found at the bottom of the tower steps, his neck broken clean through." "How dreadful," Miss Marple murmured, though her fingers had stilled on her knitting, and her mind had begun to work in that peculiar way it did when something struck her as not quite right. The train slowed, and through the window she could see Mournfell emerging from the mist like something from a medieval painting. Stone cottages clustered together as if seeking warmth from one another, their windows glowing weakly against the encroaching darkness. And dominating everything, rising from the center of the village like a finger pointing accusingly at heaven, was the bell tower of St. Bartholomew's Church. Mrs. Letitia Harrow was waiting at the tiny station, wrapped in a thick wool coat and clutching an umbrella against a fine mist that seemed to hang permanently in the air. "Dear Jane," she cried, embracing her old friend warmly. "How brave of you to come all this way and in such weather. Come, we must get you to the vicarage before you catch your death." As they walked through the narrow, cobbled streets, Miss Marple noticed how quiet the village was. Curtains twitched as they passed, and faces appeared briefly at windows before drawing into shadow. "Your village seems rather subdued," Miss Marple observed. Mrs. Harrow's cheerful expression faltered. "Oh, Jane, such terrible things have happened. Poor Thomas Reed. You'll have heard about on the train, I expect. Everyone talks about it. The bell rang at midnight during that dreadful storm 3 nights ago, and in the morning Thomas was found dead in the church tower. The conductor mentioned something about a curse. Superstitious nonsense, of course, Mrs. Harrow said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. But the timing was uncanny, I must admit. The bell rang exactly 12 times, just as a clock struck midnight, and Thomas must have fallen at that very moment. Dr. Carroll says it was a tragic accident, that Thomas slipped on the wet stones. They had reached the vicarage, a comfortable stone house nestled beside the church. As Mrs. Harrow pushed open the door, warm light and the smell of baking bread welcomed them inside. "Now then," Mrs. Harrow said, helping Miss Marple out her coat, "you must be exhausted. I prepared the guest room, and there's a hot water bottle in the bed already. Tomorrow you can rest properly, and—" Oh! She had been interrupted by a knock at the door. When she opened it, a small, precise figure stood on the threshold, silhouetted against the evening mist. "Madam Harrow, I am Hercule Poirot. I believe your late brother, Canon Harrow, wrote to me some months ago about a clock." Mrs. Harrow's hand flew to her mouth. "Mr. Poirot. Oh, my goodness! I had completely forgotten. Yes, my brother did write to you about the church clock. He thought it might be quite valuable, some antique mechanism. But I'm afraid, well, my brother passed away 6 weeks ago, Mr. Poirot. His heart gave out quite suddenly." "I am desolated to hear this news," Poirot said, removing his hat. "Please accept my most sincere condolences. However, I have made the journey, and if the clock still requires examination—" Of course. You must stay with us. We have room, and—" Mrs. Harrow turned to Miss Marple with a slightly flustered expression. "Jane, this is Mr. Hercule Poirot, the detective. Mr. Poirot, this is my very dear friend, Miss Jane Marple." "Enchanted, mademoiselle," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "How do you do?" Miss Marple replied, and something in her eyes suggested that she recognized the name and was not all displeased by this unexpected arrival. As they sat down to dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to Thomas Reed's death. "The village is quite shaken," Mrs. Harrow explained, ladling soup into bowls. Thomas was a bell ringer for 40 years. A strange man, rather obsessive about his duties, but harmless enough. He lived alone in a cottage near the churchyard and spent most of his time tending the church. "This bell that rang at midnight," Poirot said thoughtfully. "It rang by itself, yes?" "Well, that's just it," Mrs. Harrow said. "Everyone assumed Thomas was ringing it. He always did, you see, to mark the hour. But if he fell, then who rang the bell?" Miss Marple finished gently. The question hung in the air like the mist outside. "Dr. Carroll believes Thomas had already pulled the rope, setting the mechanism in motion before he fell," Mrs. Harrow said. "The bell can continue ringing for several pulls once it started." Poirot's eyebrows lifted delicately. "This Dr. Carroll, he is a village physician?" "Yes, and a very good one. He served as a medical officer in the war. He examined Thomas and confirmed that death was from a broken neck, consistent with a fall down the tower steps." "I should like to see this church tower," Poirot announced. "Tomorrow, perhaps, if Madame would permit." "Of course," Mrs. Harrow said. "Though I must warn you, the vicar, Reverend Clare, is rather sensitive about the whole matter. He's new to the parish, only arrived 2 months ago, and this tragedy has affected him deeply." That night, Miss Marple lay in her comfortable bed, listening to the sound of the sea in the distance and the occasional creak of the old house settling. She found herself thinking about the bell, about Thomas Reed, and about the peculiar atmosphere that seemed to hang over Mournfell like its ever-present fog. Just before she drifted off to sleep, she heard it. Faint but unmistakable. The church bell, tolling a single, mournful note that echoed through the darkness. Chapter 2. The Tower and Its Secrets. Morning came gray and damp. Miss Marple descended to breakfast to find Poirot already there, immaculately dressed despite the early hour, sipping coffee and examining a small leather-bound notebook. "Good morning, Mademoiselle Marple," he said, rising politely. "I trust you slept well?" "Tolerably well, thank you, though I did hear the church bell ring once during the night." Poirot's green eyes sharpened with interest. "Indeed? At what hour?" "I cannot be certain. Perhaps 2 or 3 o'clock." "Curious," Poirot murmured. "Most curious." Mrs. Harrow bustled in with fresh toast. "Oh, you heard that too? It rings sometimes, just a single toll. No one knows why. Perhaps the wind catches a clapper, or the mechanism is faulty. Thomas used to say the bell had a mind of its own." After breakfast, Poirot and Miss Marple set out together toward the church. The morning mist was just beginning to lift, revealing St. Bartholomew's in all its medieval glory. The church was built of dark gray stone, weathered by centuries of coastal storms, and the tower rose 4 stories high, ending in a crenellated top that made it look almost like a fortress. They found the vicar in the vestry, a slender man in his 30s with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes. "Reverend Clare," Mrs. Harrow had given him a note of introduction, "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is Miss Marple. We are staying with Mrs. Harrow, and I was invited by her late brother to examine the church clock. With your permission, I should like to see the bell tower." The vicar's face went even paler. "The tower? Is that... of course you may go up, but it's a difficult climb, and after what happened to poor Reed—" "We shall be most careful," Miss Marple said kindly. "You've had a dreadful shock, Reverend. Such a tragedy for your first months in the parish." "It haunts me," the vicar said quietly. "I keep thinking, if only I'd been here that night. If only I'd checked on him. Reed had been acting strangely for several days before his death, muttering about sins and judgments. I should have paid more attention. What sort of things did he say?" Miss Marple asked gently. Reverend Clare rubbed his forehead. "He said the bell knew, that it called to those whose time had come. He kept a notebook. He showed it to me once, filled with names and dates. He called it his book of accounts. I thought it was harmless eccentricity, but now I wonder if he knew something that got him killed." "You believe it was not an accident?" Poirot's voice was sharp. The vicar looked startled by his own words. I don't know what I believe. The constable said accident. Dr. Carroll said accident, and yet the bell rang 12 times at midnight." Poirot finished softly. The tower staircase was narrow and steep, spiraling upward in darkness broken only by narrow slit windows. Miss Marple climbed slowly but steadily, while Poirot moved with surprising agility for a man of his fastidious nature. The bell chamber itself was a large stone room, cold and echoing. The great bell hung in the center, surrounded by the wooden frame and mechanism that controlled its ringing. The bell rope dangled down through a hole in the floor, extending all the way to the ground floor below. Poirot examined everything with minute attention. He produced a magnifying glass and studied the floor, the walls, the rope itself. "Observe, Mademoiselle Marple," he said after several minutes. "This rope is new." Miss Marple came closer. Indeed, the bell rope was made of fresh hemp, its fibers still bright and unworn. "The old rope," Poirot continued, "where is it?" They searched and found in a corner a length of rope cut cleanly through, the end frayed only slightly. "Someone cut it," Miss Marple said quietly. "But why? And when?" Poirot knelt by the place where Thomas Reed's body had been found, at the top of the stairs leading down from the bell chamber. "The constable's report, which Madame Harrow showed me this morning, says that Reed was found with his hand curled as if still gripping the rope. But look," he pointed to several dark stains on the stone. "There is blood here, yes, from the wound to his head, but also, see here." He indicated several small, yellowish spots near the bloodstains. "Candle wax," Miss Marple observed. "And unless I'm very much mistaken, scented candle wax, not the plain tallow used in the church. Someone was here with a scented candle on the night Reed died, and furthermore, Poirot moved to examine Reed's supposed position more closely. If he fell while pulling the bell rope, he should have fallen backward away from the stairs. But he was found at the very top of the staircase, head pointing downward, as if he had been climbing up when he fell. Or pushed," Miss Marple finished quietly. Poirot straightened, brushing dust from his perfectly creased trousers. "The picture becomes clearer, does it not? Someone came here that night with a candle. Someone cut the old bell rope. Someone installed a new one. And somehow, Thomas Reed ended up dead at the bottom of these stairs, while the village slept and the storm raged outside. But the bell," Miss Marple said, "it rang 12 times. Everyone heard it. If Thomas was already dead, then we must discover who rang the bell and why." Poirot said grimly. As they descended the tower, they encountered a young man coming up, broad-shouldered, with anxious eyes and work-roughened hands. "Begging your pardon," he said, pressing himself against the wall to let them pass. "I'm Arthur Blaine, the verger. Reverend Clare said someone was examining the tower. We are merely satisfying our curiosity," Poirot said. "You knew Thomas Reed well, Monsieur Blaine?" The young man's face darkened. "I worked with him for 5 years. He taught me everything about the church maintenance. He was a good man, whatever people say." "What do people say?" Miss Marple asked gently. Blaine hesitated, then burst out. "They say he was mad, obsessed with that bell and his superstitions. But he wasn't mad. He was right to worry. There's evil in this village, and he knew it. He was going to expose it, and that's why he died." "Expose what?" Poirot asked sharply. But Blaine had already brushed past them, continuing up the stairs to the bell chamber. Outside the church, they found a small group had gathered near the lich gate. A stout, red-faced man arguing with a tall, elegant woman dressed in widow's black. "This is intolerable, Mrs. Ellery," the man was saying. "The parish accounts must be open to inspection. Reed's accusations cannot simply be forgotten, because he's dead." "Mr. Drake," the woman replied coldly, "Thomas Reed was not in his right mind. His accusations were the product of disturbed imagination, and I'll thank you not to repeat them in public." The man, clearly the Lionel Drake that Mrs. Harrow had mentioned as churchwarden, turned purple. "Not in his right mind? He found discrepancies in the books, and you know it. Someone has been stealing from the parish fund, and Reed knew who." He stormed off, leaving the woman standing alone. She seemed to sense their presence and turned, revealing a pale, fine-boned face with large, dark eyes. "Forgive me," she said quietly. "You must be Mrs. Harrow's guests. I am Beatrice Ellery, the church organist. I do apologize for that unseemly display." "Not at all, madam," Poirot said. "It is we who intrude. But tell me, this accusation of theft from the parish funds, it is serious, no?" Mrs. Ellery's hands, pale and long-fingered, twisted together. Thomas Reed saw us in everywhere. He convinced himself that someone was embezzling money. But the accounts are perfectly in order. I should know. I helped the vicar with the bookkeeping. And yet Monsieur Drake seems concerned, Poirot observed. Mr. Drake is concerned because Thomas specifically accused him, Mrs. Ellery said with sudden venom. Reed claimed that Drake was stealing to pay gambling debts. But there's no proof, and now that Reed is dead, the matter should be laid to rest. She swept past him toward the church, leaving a faint scent of lavender in her wake. Interesting, Poirot murmured. Most interesting. Come, Mademoiselle Marple. I think we should pay a visit to the late Thomas Reed's cottage. Chapter 3. The Book of Accounts. Thomas Reed's cottage stood at the edge of the churchyard, a small stone building that seemed to lean wearily against the wind. The constable had sealed it, but a word from Mrs. Harrow and a small gratuity soon produced a key. The interior was sparse but meticulously clean. A narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, and shelf upon shelf of books, mostly religious texts and histories of churches and bells. He was an educated man, Miss Marple observed, examining the volumes. Self-taught, perhaps, but widely read. Poirot was searching with methodical precision, examining every drawer, every shelf, every possible hiding place. Finally, he stood in the center of the room, his eyes closed, thinking. The notebook, he said. The book of accounts that the vicar mentioned. Would Reed keep such a thing? Miss Marple had moved to the bedroom. Mr. Poirot, she called softly, I think you should see this. Under the floorboards beneath Reed's bed, carefully hidden but not expertly concealed, they found a small wooden box. Inside was a sum of money, approximately £200, and a leather-bound notebook. Poirot opened the notebook with careful fingers. Page after page was filled with Reed's cramped handwriting, names, dates, and cryptic notes. Look at this, Miss Marple said, pointing to an entry from 6 months ago. Dr. M. Caro, August 15th, 1924, Mrs. Whitley's death. Too much morphine? Further down the page, questioned doctor about dosage. He became angry, said I understood nothing of medicine, but I know what I heard her daughter say. Other entries were equally disturbing. L. Drake, parish funds, check ledger myself. £50 missing from Easter collection. B. Ellery, met with Canon Harrow late at night, June 20th. What business at midnight? A. Blaine, saw him near tower with hammer and rope, installing or removing. E. Harrow, arrived from London with bruises on her arms. Will not speak of it. Reverend Clare, too frightened. Of what? Of whom? The final entry, dated 3 days before Reed's death, sent a chill through both detectives. They know I know. Followed me twice this week. Must secure evidence before I speak. The bell will call the guilty soon. I hear in my dreams. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. This is not the notebook of a madman. This is the record of a man who discovered too many secrets. And who was killed for his discoveries? Miss Marple added quietly. They spent another hour searching the cottage and found several other interesting items. A receipt for a new bell rope purchased 2 weeks before Reed's death, a letter from Dr. Caro, tersely declining to discuss certain wartime medical matters, and a photograph hidden in a Bible of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Beatrice Ellery. As they prepared to leave, Miss Marple paused at the window, looking out at the churchyard. The money, she said thoughtfully. £200 hidden under his floor. If Lionel Drake stole from the parish fund, why would Reed have the money? Precisely the question, mademoiselle. Either Reed was himself the thief, using his accusations to deflect suspicion, which seems quite out of character for such a meticulous moral man, Miss Marple interrupted, or someone placed the money there to implicate him posthumously, to make it appear that his accusations were merely the guilty conscience of a thief. They returned to the vicarage to find Mrs. Harrow in a state of considerable agitation, speaking with a distinguished-looking man in his 50s. "Ah, Jane, Mr. Poirot, this is Dr. Carroll. He's just been telling me the most alarming news." Dr. Carroll bowed slightly. A tall man with iron-gray hair and penetrating eyes. He had the bearing of one accustomed to authority. "I'm afraid I've come on a rather grim errand. There's been another death." Miss Marple's hand went to her throat. Not a violent death, I should clarify," Dr. Carroll said quickly. "Mrs. Whitley's daughter, Sarah, passed away this morning. Heart failure, quite sudden. She'd been in poor health since her mother died last summer, but this was unexpected." "I am sorry to hear it," Poirot said. "You attended both mother and daughter, Doctor?" Something flickered in Dr. Carroll's eyes. "I did, as I attend most of the village. Mrs. Whitley Sr. died of pneumonia, and her daughter has now succumbed to a weak heart, exacerbated by grief." "How very sad," Miss Marple murmured. "And yet one cannot help but think of poor Mr. Reed's notebook. He seemed to have questions about Mrs. Whitley's death." The doctor's face hardened. Thomas Reed was a superstitious fool who understood nothing of medicine. I don't know what he wrote in his notebook, but I can assure you that my treatment of Mrs. Whitley was entirely proper. "Of course," Poirot said smoothly. "No one suggests otherwise, Doctor. But tell me, on the night of Reed's death, the night of the storm, where were you?" "I was attending a difficult birth on the Thornton farm, 5 miles north of here. I was there from 9 in the evening until past 2 in the morning. You may verify this with Mr. and Mrs. Thornton if you wish." "Yet you could hear the bell?" Miss Marple asked innocently. "Mrs. Harrow mentioned you said you heard it ring 12 times. Dr. Carroll's jaw tightened. "I must have been mistaken about that. The distance is too great. I was told about the bell the next morning. Good day to you all." He departed rather abruptly, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind him. "Dear me," Mrs. Harrow said weakly, "I'm afraid I may have spoken out of turn about the bell, but I was certain he mentioned hearing it that evening." As they sat in Mrs. Harrow's comfortable parlor, Poirot and Miss Marple compared notes. "Let's examine what we know," Poirot said, steepling his fingers. "Thomas Reed discovers what he believes are various transgressions by members of the church community. He keeps careful records. He purchases a new bell rope 2 weeks before his death. Why? Then on a stormy night, he is found dead at the top of the tower stairs. The old bell rope has been cut, a new one installed. There is scented candle wax at the scene. The bell rings 12 times at midnight, though Reed is already dead. And £200, possibly the stolen parish funds, are found hidden in his cottage. And now," Miss Marple added, "the daughter of a woman whose death Reed questioned has herself died suddenly. A coincidence, perhaps, but rather a convenient one. You think Dr. Carroll killed the daughter to prevent her from speaking?" "I think," Miss Marple said carefully, "that when people are frightened, they sometimes do desperate things." Dr. Carroll seemed very defensive about his treatment of Mrs. Whitley, and his alibi for the night of Reed's death, while it could be verified, has a curious weakness. He claims he couldn't have heard the bell from the Thornton farm, yet Mrs. Harrow distinctly remembers him saying he did hear it. So either he lied then, or he lies now. Poirot mused. But why? If he was 5 miles away, the lie serves no purpose unless he was not at the Thornton farm at all, but somewhere closer. Close enough to hear the bell. Close enough, perhaps, to ring it. But the Thorntons will surely confirm or deny his presence, Miss Marple pointed out. Unless they are accomplices, Poirot said darkly, or unless Dr. Carroll left the farm for a period during the evening. A doctor's presence at a difficult birth is not constant. There are hours of waiting. Perhaps he slipped away, did what needed to be done, and returned. Before Miss Marple could respond, there came a loud knocking at the door. Mrs. Harrow went to answer it and returned moments later, white-faced, with the village constable. "Beg pardon for the intrusion," the constable said, cap in hand. "But there's been another incident at the church. The bell, it's ringing again. Just started up 5 minutes ago, tolling over and over, and the church is locked up tight. Nobody can get in." They rushed through the darkening streets toward St. Bartholomew's. The bell was indeed ringing. Not the measured 12 tolls of midnight, but a wild, continuous clanging that seemed to echo off the very sky. A crowd had gathered outside the locked church doors. Lionel Drake was there, trying to force the lock. Arthur Blaine stood apart, his face gray with terror. Beatrice Ellery clutched her shawl around her shoulders, staring up at the tower as if hypnotized. "The key," Poirot demanded. "Who has the key?" "Reverend Clare," Drake panted. "But he's not here. He went to visit a sick parishioner in Lower Mournfell." "Then we break down the door," Poirot declared. It took 3 strong men, Drake, Blaine, and the constable, to force the ancient oak door. The moment it gave way, the bell fell silent. They rushed inside. The church was empty, dark except for a few flickering candles. The bell rope hung motionless. Poirot was already climbing the tower stairs, Miss Marple following more slowly. They reached the bell chamber to find it exactly as they had left it that morning, except for one detail. On the floor, arranged in a circle around the bell mechanism, were 6 small dolls made of wax and cloth. Each had a name pinned to it: Lionel Drake, Beatrice Ellery, Arthur Blaine, Miles Carroll, Evelyn Harrow, Simon Clare. "A charm," Miss Marple said quietly. "Or a warning. Or," Poirot added grimly, "a death list." Chapter 4, Secrets and Lies. The discovery of the wax dolls created a sensation in Mournfell. Constable Harris insisted on taking them as evidence, though evidence of what crime, he couldn't quite say. Reverend Clare, when he returned that evening, was horrified and immediately called for prayers of protection. "This is devil's work," he declared, his hands shaking as he held one of the dolls. "Someone is trying to curse us all." Poirot, however, was more interested in the practical questions. "Who has keys to the church besides yourself, Reverend?" "The verger, Arthur Blaine, and the church warden, Mr. Drake. That's all." And on this evening, between 6 and 7 o'clock, when the bell began ringing, where was everyone? Arthur Blaine had been in his cottage on the far side of the village, alone. Lionel Drake claimed he was in his study, going over accounts, also alone. Dr. Carroll had been making rounds, visiting 3 different patients, all of whom could confirm his presence, though not every minute was accounted for. Beatrice Ellery had been at home, practicing the organ. Her neighbors heard the music. Evelyn Harrow, Mrs. Harrow's artistic niece who had arrived from London 2 weeks earlier, had been sketching by the harbor. In other words, Miss Marple summarized when they reconvened at the vicarage, everyone has partial alibis, but no one can account for every moment. Except, Mrs. Harrow interjected nervously, surely Evelyn is not a suspect? She hardly knew Thomas Reed, and she's only been here a fortnight. Evelyn herself appeared at that moment. A striking young woman of about 30 with bobbed hair and paint stains on her fingers. She had about her the slightly bohemian air of artistic London society. Aunt Letitia, I've just heard about the horrible dolls. How perfectly ghastly. Do they really think someone is trying to curse the village? We think, Poirot said carefully, that someone wishes to create fear. Tell me, Mademoiselle Harrow, you arrived in Mournfell 2 weeks ago. Did you know Thomas Reed? Only to nod to in passing. I'm sorry he's dead, of course, but I can't say I knew the man. And yet, Miss Marple said gently, according to his notebook, he made a note about you. He wrote that you arrived from London with bruises on your arms. Evelyn's face went rigid. He had no right to spy on me. Were you injured, my dear? Mrs. Harrow asked, concerned. It was nothing, a foolish accident. I walked into a door. But her eyes slid away as she said it, and Miss Marple recognized the tone of a well-rehearsed lie. Forgive me, mademoiselle, Poirot said, but you seem frightened. Of what are you afraid? For a moment, it seemed Evelyn might confess something. Then she shook her head violently. I'm not afraid. I'm angry. Angry that I came to this dreary village for peace and quiet and found myself in the middle of this madness. I'm going back to London tomorrow. That might not be wise, Poirot said quietly. Not until we understand what is happening here. Are you saying I'm a prisoner? I am saying that whoever killed Thomas Reed, and I am now certain he was killed, may not have finished their work. That night, unable to sleep, Miss Marple sat in her room and thought about all they had learned. The case had the quality of a puzzle where all the pieces were present but refused to fit together properly. Thomas Reed had known something, multiple somethings, about the people of Mournfell. He had documented his suspicions carefully, and someone had killed him for it. But who? And which secret had been worth murder? She thought about the dolls, 6 names, 6 people. Was it a threat against them all, or was the murderer among them? Tried to deflect suspicion by including themselves in the potential victims? A sound from outside made her rise and go to the window. Below, in the moonlit churchyard, a figure moved between the gravestones. Miss Marple quickly threw on her dressing gown and made her way downstairs. She found Poirot already there, fully dressed, watching from the parlor window. You saw it too? She whispered. Yes. Someone visits the churchyard at past midnight. Let us see who is so devoted. They slipped out the side door and kept to the shadows. The figure was at Thomas Reed's grave, a fresh mound of earth, not yet marked with a stone. As they watched, the figure knelt and seemed to be digging at the earth with their hands. Now, Poirot whispered, and they stepped forward. The figure spun around with a gasp. It was Arthur Blaine, mud on his hands and tears on his face. Mr. Blaine, Miss Marple said gently, what are you doing here? I wanted to say goodbye properly, he stammered. I was his assistant for 5 years. He taught me everything. But at the funeral, there were so many people, and I couldn't. He broke down, sobbing. You cared for him deeply, Miss Marple observed. He was like a father to me. My own father drank himself to death when I was 10. Tom Reed gave me work, gave me purpose. He was a good man. He didn't deserve to die like that. You were near the tower on the night he died, Poirot said. It was not a question. Blaine's head jerked up. How did you... Yes, I was... I heard the storm coming, and went to check that everything was secured. The tower sometimes leaks in heavy weather. But Tom was alive when I left. I swear it. What time was this? Poirot pressed. About 11 o'clock. Tom was in the bell chamber, checking the rope. He'd replaced it that afternoon, said the old one was getting weak. He told me to go home, that he'd lock up. And you saw no one else? No one. But Blaine hesitated. As I was leaving, I noticed a light in the vestry window. Just for a moment, I thought Tom had left a candle burning, but when I looked again, it was dark. You did not investigate? Poirot asked. I should have, Blaine said miserably. But the rain was starting, and I was cold, and I thought Tom would see to it. If I'd stayed, if I'd gone back to check, maybe he'd still be alive. You cannot blame yourself, Miss Marple said kindly. But tell me, this light in the vestry, could you see who was there? No, it was just a glow, like a candle being carried past a window. It could have been anyone, or anything, Poirot murmured. A reflection, perhaps. I know what I saw, Blaine said stubbornly. Someone else was in that church that night. After Blaine had gone, trudging back toward his cottage, Poirot and Miss Marple stood together in the churchyard, the ancient stones leaning around them like silent witnesses. He speaks the truth about his affection for Reed, Miss Marple said. I've known many young men like Arthur Blaine, loyal, earnest, perhaps not very imaginative. He would have no reason to harm his mentor, unless, Poirot suggested, the mentor had discovered something about him, something shameful. Reed's notebook mentioned seeing Blaine with a hammer and rope near the tower. What if Blaine was not installing equipment, but removing evidence? Evidence of what? That, mademoiselle, is a question we must answer. Chapter 5. The Web Titans. The following morning brought rain, a steady, persistent downpour that turned the village streets to mud and gave everyone an excuse to remain indoors. Poirot took the opportunity to visit Dr. Carrow's surgery, while Miss Marple called upon Beatrice Ellery. Dr. Carrow's surgery was a neat, efficient establishment attached to his house on the High Street. A housekeeper showed Poirot into a consulting room lined with medical books and anatomical charts. Mr. Poirot, Dr. Carrow said, entering briskly, I hope you're not unwell. My health is excellent, thank you. I come instead with questions about Thomas Reed's death. The doctor's expression hardened. I've already told the constable everything I know. Reed died from a broken neck, consistent with fall down stone stairs. There were no suspicious circumstances. No suspicious circumstances? Poirot's eyebrows rose. But the bell, doctor, the bell that rang 12 times at midnight. Who rang it if Reed was already dead? The mechanism must have been activated before he fell. These old bell systems can be unpredictable. I have examined the mechanism, Poirot said quietly. It cannot ring itself 12 times. Each stroke requires a separate pull of the rope. Dr. Carrow poured himself a drink from a decanter on his desk. His hand, Poirot noticed, was not entirely steady. Then perhaps someone else rang it. Someone who didn't realize Reed was already dead. This is a small village, Mr. Poirot. Strange things happen. It doesn't mean murder. You serve in the war, I understand, as a medical officer. The change of subject seemed to unsettle the doctor further. I did, in France. Why do you ask? Because Thomas Reed's notebook contains questions about your wartime service, specifically about your use of morphine. Dr. Carrow set down his glass with a sharp click. Reed was obsessed with morphine after I treated Mrs. Whitley for her pain before she died. He convinced himself I had overdosed her, which is absurd. The woman was dying of pneumonia. I merely made her comfortable. And yet her daughter, who might have testified to her mother's final days, has now also died. Conveniently. How dare you? Dr. Carroll stood abruptly. Sarah Whitley died of heart failure. I have the medical records to prove it. I'll thank you to leave my surgery now, Mr. Poirot, before I have the constable remove you. Poirot rose with dignity. I shall go, but understand, doctor, if you are innocent, you have nothing to fear from my investigation. If you are guilty, I will discover it. The truth, she has a way of revealing herself. Meanwhile, Miss Marple had reached Beatrice Ellery's cottage, a charming stone house near the rectory, surrounded by a garden that even in late autumn showed signs of careful tending. Mrs. Ellery received her in a parlor dominated by a grand piano. Sheet music lay scattered across every surface, and a faint scent of lavender hung in the air. Miss Marple, Mrs. Ellery said, pouring tea with hands that trembled slightly. I confess I'm surprised by your visit. I would have thought you'd have nothing to do with the likes of me, given the gossip. Gossip? Miss Marple inquired innocently. About my friendship with Canon Harrow, Mrs. Harrow's late brother. Mrs. Ellery's pale face flushed. I suppose Reed's notebook has revealed all our secrets. The notebook mentions a late-night meeting, Miss Marple said gently. Nothing more. Then I shall tell you the truth, since it will come out anyway. Mrs. Ellery stared into her teacup. I love Canon Harrow. He was 20 years my senior and a priest, and it was hopeless and wrong, but I loved him nonetheless. That is, there was nothing improper, but we met sometimes to talk, to share music. His wife had been dead for many years, and he was lonely, as was I. And Thomas Reed discovered these meetings. He saw us once, coming from the church late at night. We'd been discussing and knew him. I was composing. But Reed, he twisted everything into sin. He came to me 3 weeks before he died and accused me of corrupting a man of God. I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He said I would be exposed, that my name would be struck from the church rolls. You must have been very angry, Miss Marple observed. I was frightened, Mrs. Ellery corrected. My reputation is all I have, Miss Marple. I'm a widow with a small income. I give music lessons to survive. If Reed had spread his accusations, I would have been ruined. Frightened enough to kill? Mrs. Ellery's teacup rattled in its saucer. I didn't kill him. Yes, I hated him for his judgments and his self-righteousness. But I didn't kill him. On the night of the storm, I was here, alone. I have no alibi, but I'm telling you the truth. The candle wax found in the bell chamber, Miss Marple said. It was scented. Lavender, I believe. The same scent that hangs in this room. The organist went white. I don't understand. I never went to the bell chamber that night. I never. She stopped, realization dawning. Someone took my candles. I keep them for my evening practice. It's soothing to play by candlelight, but I noticed several weeks ago that one was missing. I thought I'd simply misplaced it. When did you notice it was gone? I can't remember exactly. 2 weeks ago? 3? But, Miss Marple, anyone could have taken it. I often leave my door unlocked when I'm at the church practicing. It was, Miss Marple reflected, a very convenient explanation, and yet there was something in Mrs. Ellery's distress that rang true. That afternoon, Poirot and Miss Marple met at the church to compare notes. The rain had stopped, leaving everything gleaming and fresh-washed. Dr. Carroll is hiding something, Poirot declared. He is too defensive about the morphine, too quick to anger, and his alibi for the night of Reed's death. It has weaknesses. Mrs. Ellery is terrified, Miss Marple added, but I'm not convinced she's our murderer. Her fear seems genuine, and the business about the stolen candle. Well, it could be true, or it could be a clever defense prepared in advance, Poirot pointed out. But let us consider the other suspects. Lionel Drake, he had motive, yes? Reed accused him of stealing from the parish funds. And yet, the money was found in Reed's cottage, Miss Marple reminded him, which suggests either Reed was the actual thief or someone is trying to frame him posthumously. I favor the latter theory, Poirot said. Reed was too methodical, too concerned with morality, to be a thief. Someone planted that money to discredit him. They were interrupted by the arrival of Evelyn Harrow, who approached them with obvious reluctance. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, I need to speak with you. About the notebook, about what Reed saw. They withdrew to a quiet corner of the churchyard, and Evelyn began to speak in a low, tense voice. Reed was right about the bruises, but it wasn't an accident. My fiancé in London, he hit me, not once, but several times over the course of our engagement. I finally broke it off and came here to escape him and to recover. I didn't tell Aunt Letitia the truth because I was ashamed. But Reed saw the marks, and he wanted me to go to the police, to expose my fiancé publicly. I refused. I just wanted to forget. And so Reed had power over you, Poirot said quietly. The power to reveal your secret, to bring your abuser to justice against your wishes. I wasn't thinking clearly, Evelyn said desperately. I just wanted it all to go away. But I didn't kill Reed. I had no reason to. He promised he would keep my confidence if I sought help. He was actually quite kind about it, once he understood. Then why tell us now? Miss Marple asked gently. Because I saw the way you looked at me last night. I could see you suspected me. And because her voice dropped to a whisper, because I think I know who killed him. Both detectives leaned forward. On the night of the storm, I couldn't sleep. I was restless, anxious. Around 11:30, I looked out my window. I'm staying in a room that overlooks the churchyard, and I saw someone crossing toward the church. They were carrying a lantern, and they were in a great hurry. Who? Poirot demanded. Who did you see? I couldn't see their face, but I recognized the way they walked. They had a limp, not a severe one, but noticeable. They dragged their left leg slightly. Miss Marple and Poirot exchanged glances. Dr. Carroll, Miss Marple said. He limps from a war injury. Yes, Evelyn said. I didn't want to believe it, but yes. After Evelyn had gone, Poirot began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. The doctor, he muttered. Always it returns to the doctor. He has the medical knowledge to stage an accidental death. He has a secret about morphine that Reed threatened to reveal. He has no solid alibi for the crucial time. And now, a witness places someone with his distinctive walk near the church at the time of the murder. And yet, Miss Marple said thoughtfully, something troubles me. If Dr. Carroll killed Reed, why the elaborate staging with the bell? Why not simply push him down the stairs and let it seem a simple accident? Why draw attention with 12 chimes at midnight? To reinforce the superstition, Poirot suggested, to make the village believe in the curse of the bell, to create fear and confusion. Perhaps, but there's something else, Mr. Poirot. Something about the timing. The bell rang at midnight, exactly. Reed was killed earlier, we believe around 11:30, based on Arthur Blaine's testimony. That means a murderer had to return to ring the bell, or arrange for it to ring automatically at the correct time. The church clock, Poirot said suddenly. The antique clock that Canon Harrow wanted me to examine. What if it is connected to the bell mechanism? What if the murderer used it to create an automatic striking mechanism? They hurried to the tower. The church clock was ancient, its face cracked and yellowed, its mechanism a complex arrangement of gears and weights housed in a chamber just below the bell room. Poirot examined it with growing excitement. Voila! See here, someone has added a new gear train, connected to the bell mechanism. And here, he pointed to a small wooden cam. This would allow the bell to be struck a specific number of times at a specific hour. It is crude but effective. So the murderer set this mechanism before killing Reed, Miss Marple said. They arranged for the bell to ring at midnight automatically, giving themselves time to establish an alibi elsewhere. Precisely. And who would have mechanical knowledge to make such a modification? A doctor who served in the war, Miss Marple said slowly, would have some mechanical aptitude. But so would a verger who maintains church equipment, or a church warden who oversees repairs. We narrow the field, but do not yet identify the culprit, Poirot said frustratingly. We must. He was interrupted by a scream from below, a woman's voice, high and terrified. They rushed down the tower stairs and out into the churchyard. A small crowd had already gathered near the vestry door. Lionel Drake lay on the ground, his face blue, his body twisted in agony. Standing over him, her hands to her face in horror, was Beatrice Ellery. I found him, she gasped. I came to practice the organ and found him like this. He's dead, isn't he? Dr. Carroll pushed through the crowd and knelt by the body. After a moment, he looked up grimly. He's been poisoned. Recently, within the last hour. Someone has murdered Lionel Drake. Chapter 6. The News Titans. Constable Harris, faced with a second suspicious death, finally sent for Scotland Yard. But the nearest inspector was a day's journey away, and in the meantime, the investigation fell to Hercule Poirot. The little detective took charge with quiet authority. He had the body moved to Dr. Carroll's surgery for examination, the vestry sealed, and every member of the church community assembled in the vicarage for questioning. The poison, Poirot announced to the assembled group, was administered in a glass of communion wine. Mr. Drake had apparently come early to the church to review accounts in the vestry. Someone gave him poison wine, knowing it would act quickly. What poison? Arthur Blaine asked, his face gray. Cyanide, Dr. Carroll said heavily. Death would have been nearly instantaneous. Whoever did this wanted to ensure he couldn't call for help. And who has access to cyanide? Poirot inquired silkily. I do, Dr. Carroll admitted. For medical purposes. It's kept locked in my surgery, but he faltered. But I discovered this morning that the bottle is missing from my cabinet. How convenient, Reverend Clare said bitterly. Someone steals poison from your surgery and uses it to commit murder, and we're to believe you had nothing to do with it. The surgery was broken into 3 nights ago, Dr. Carroll protested. I reported it to the constable. Nothing seemed to be taken at the time, but now Mr. Drake is dead, Poirot finished. And the question is, why? What did he know? What did he see? He saw the accounts, Beatrice Ellery said quietly. He'd been obsessed with proving Thomas Reed was right about the missing money. Yesterday he told me he'd found something, a discrepancy that proved the theft was real. He was going to announce his findings at Sunday's church council meeting. Did he tell you what he discovered? Miss Marple asked. No. He said he wanted to verify it first. He seemed almost frightened, as if whatever he'd found was more serious than simple embezzlement. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The accounts, where they kept, in the vestry safe. Reverend Clare said, "Only Drake and I have the combination. Then we must examine them immediately." But when they opened the vestry safe, they found it empty. The parish account ledgers, along with all financial records for the past 5 years, were gone. "Someone has stolen them," the vicar said, stunned. "But when I checked the safe just yesterday morning, and everything was there," which means, Poirot said grimly, that the thief, our murderer, knew Mr. Drake had found something incriminating in those ledgers. They killed him and stole the evidence in one efficient action. Miss Marple had been examining the vestry with her characteristic attention to small details. "Mr. Poirot," she called softly, "look here." Near the door, almost hidden in the shadow, was a small smear of paint, bright cadmium red. Evelyn Harrow, standing in the doorway, gasped. That's from my paint box. But I haven't been in the vestry for days." "Are you certain, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked. "Yes. I use that particular red for sunset paintings. It's a very distinctive shade. But my paint box is in my room at the vicarage. Anyone could have taken some. Or," Dr. Carroll said coldly, "you could be lying. You're the artist, the one with access to these paints. Perhaps you needed those ledgers for your own reasons." "What possible reason would I have?" Evelyn cried. "Perhaps," the doctor continued relentlessly, "you're protecting someone. Your aunt, perhaps, or someone else you care about." Before the argument could escalate further, Poirot held up his hand. "Enough. We solve nothing by accusations without proof. Dr. Carroll, you'll prepare a full toxicology report. Constable Harris, you will search every house in this village for the missing ledgers. Mademoiselle Ellery, you'll provide a complete accounting of your movements this morning. And all of you, will remain in Mournfell until the inspector from Scotland Yard arrives. Is that understood?" There were reluctant nods all around. That evening, Miss Marple and Poirot sat in Mrs. Harrow's parlor, the fire crackling before them. "2 murders," Miss Marple said quietly. "Thomas Reed, who knew everyone's secrets, and Lionel Drake, who discovered something in the parish accounts. There must be a connection." "The connection," Poirot said, "is the thing they both threatened to reveal." Reed had his notebook full of accusations. Drake had found proof in the ledgers. Both discoveries were dangerous to someone. Dr. Carroll remains the most likely suspect, Miss Marple mused. Reed questioned his use of morphine. Drake might have found financial irregularities connected to the doctor. Improper billing, perhaps, or falsified medical certificates for insurance purposes. "It is a theory," Poirot agreed, "but I am troubled by the paint in the vestry. It suggests Evelyn Harrow's involvement. Yet, what could her motive possibly be? Perhaps she's protecting someone, as Dr. Carroll suggested. Her aunt? But Mrs. Harrow is surely beyond suspicion. Is anyone truly beyond suspicion, Mademoiselle Marple?" Before Miss Marple could answer, there came a frantic knocking at the door. Mrs. Harrow answered it to find Arthur Blaine, wild-eyed and breathless. "Come quickly. The church. Someone's in the tower, and the bell's ringing again." They raced through the dark streets towards St. Bartholomew's. Above them, the bell tolled, not the measured strokes of the hour, but frantic, irregular clanging, as if someone were pulling the rope desperately. The church door stood open. They rushed inside and up the tower stairs. In the bell chamber, they found Reverend Clare, his hands gripping the bell rope, tears streaming down his face as he rang the bell over and over. "Reverend!" Poirot shouted over the noise. "What are you doing?" The vicar released the rope and collapsed to his knees. "I can't bear it any more," he sobbed. "The guilt, the fear, the lies. I have to confess. I have to tell the truth before someone else dies." Poirot helped him to his feet. "Then tell us, mon ami, what is this truth that weighs so heavily upon you?" "I knew," Claire gasped. "I knew about Thomas Reed's accusations, and I did nothing. He came to me 2 weeks before he died and showed me his notebook. He told me about the stolen money, about Dr. Carroll morphine, about all of it. And his voice broke. I told him to be silent. I told him he would destroy the parish with his accusations. I told him to pray and leave judgment to God. And he refused?" Miss Marple said gently. "He said God's judgment required human action. He said he would go to the authorities if I didn't. So I—" Claire covered his face with his hands. "I told Dr. Carroll that Reed was planning to expose him. I thought if I warned him, he could prepare a defense, could protect himself legally. But instead, Dr. Carroll killed him." Poirot finished grimly. "I don't know." Claire cried. "I've been torturing myself ever since. Did I cause Reed's death by warning Carroll? Am I guilty of murder by my silence? And now Drake is dead too, and it's all my fault. Did you tell anyone else about Reed's accusations?" Poirot demanded. "No, only Carroll. I swear it." "Then you may not be as guilty as you think, Reverend, but you were certainly a fool." They took the distraught vicar back to the vicarage and settled him in his study with a strong whiskey. Poirot stood by the window, staring out at the darkened church. "The pieces," he murmured. "They begin to fit together. But there is still something missing, something that connects all the threads." "The ledgers," Miss Marple said suddenly. "Mr. Poirot, what if the embezzlement wasn't church funds at all? What if it was something else? Something recorded in those ledgers that had nothing to do with money?" Poirot turned to her, his eyes widening. "Mademoiselle Marple, you are brilliant. Of course, the ledgers would contain records not just of money, but of donations, bequests, memorial funds. And if someone had been falsifying those records, they would show that certain people who died had left money to the church that never arrived." Miss Marple continued excitedly. "And who would be in a position to intercept such bequests? The doctor who signed their death certificates." Poirot breathed. "Mon Dieu, Dr. Carroll has not merely been covering up medical negligence. He has been systematically murdering patients and stealing their bequests to the church." They sat in stunned silence as the full horror of it sank in. "Mrs. Whitley," Miss Marple said. "Reed questioned her death and the morphine dosage. What if Carroll overdosed her deliberately to ensure she died before changing her will? And her daughter Sarah," Poirot added, "who died just after we began investigating. She would have known if her mother intended to leave money to the church. She was a loose end that needed tying. But we still have no proof," Miss Marple pointed out. "The ledgers are gone. Reed's notebook only contains suspicions, and Drake took his discovery to the grave." "Then we must set a trap," Poirot declared. "And for that, we shall need the help of everyone in Mournfell, whether they wish to give it or not." Chapter 7. The trap is set. The next morning, Poirot called a meeting in the church. Every suspect was present. Dr. Carroll, looking haggard and defensive, Beatrice Ellery, pale and anxious, Arthur Blaine, watchful and tense, Evelyn Harrow, still protesting her innocence, and Reverend Clare bearing the weight of his guilty conscience. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, "we have reached a crisis. 2 men are dead, murdered by someone in this room. The evidence has been destroyed or stolen. But I tell you now, Hercule Poirot knows the identity of the killer." A collective intake of breath. "You know," Dr. Caro said sharply. "Then why not arrest them?" "Because," Poirot said smoothly, "I wish the killer to confess. And so, I shall reveal what I know, and the guilty party will have the opportunity to come forward voluntarily." He began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. Thomas Reed was a man who observed everything. He noticed when the parish funds didn't match the donations. He noticed when patients died under suspicious circumstances. He noticed when Dr. Caro morphine supplies depleted faster than medical necessity would explain. Most importantly, he noticed that several elderly parishioners who had promised bequests to St. Bartholomew's died before their wills could be properly executed, and that money never reached the church. Dr. Caro stood abruptly. "This is slander. I have served this village faithfully for 20 years. "Sit down, doctor," Poirot said coldly. "I have not finished. Yes, Reed suspected you, but suspicion is not proof. So Reed did something very clever. He replaced the bell rope, not because it was worn, but because he wanted an excuse to be in the tower at night, to watch and wait. He was going to catch the thief in the act." "What thief?" Blaine asked, confused. "The person who had been sneaking into the vestry at night to alter the parish records," Poirot explained. "You see, the original ledgers would have shown the promised bequests, but someone had been carefully modifying entries, removing references to money that never arrived. Reed knew the thief would have to return to complete their alterations, especially after he began making inquiries. So he set a trap. And the trap was sprung," Miss Marple added quietly, "but not in the way Reed expected. The killer realized they were being watched and decided to eliminate Reed first." "But how?" Evelyn demanded. "How was it done?" "Ah," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "That is where the true cleverness enters. The killer came to the church on the night of the storm, carrying a scented candle taken from Mrs. Ellery's house some weeks earlier. They climbed to the bell chamber, where they knew Reed would be. There was a confrontation. Perhaps Reed accused them directly. Perhaps there was a struggle. In any case, the killer strangled Reed with the very bell rope he had so recently installed." Beatrice Ellery gasped, her hand to her throat. "But the killer had a problem," Poirot continued. "The time. It was approximately 11:30. If the body were discovered immediately, their alibi would not hold. They needed to be elsewhere when the death occurred. So they did something extraordinary. They set the church clock forward by 4 minutes and rigged a mechanism to make the bell ring automatically at what would appear to be midnight. Then they arranged Reed's body on the stairs, left through the vestry door, and hurried to establish their alibi." "But who?" Claire whispered. "Who did this?" "The person who had both mechanical knowledge and medical knowledge," Poirot said. "The person who had the most to lose if Reed's accusations were proven. The person who killed Mrs. Whitley and her daughter and used their deaths to line his own pockets. Dr. Miles Caro, it was you." The doctor's face had gone deathly pale. For a moment, it seemed he might confess. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Prove it," he said. "You have no evidence. The ledgers are gone. Reed's notebook is circumstantial at best. You have nothing but theories and suppositions." "On the contrary," Poirot said quietly, "I have this." From his pocket, he produced a small glass vial. "Cyanide. taken from your surgery the night of the supposed break-in. Except there was no break-in, was there, doctor? You simply removed the poison yourself and reported a theft, creating a convenient explanation for when you would eventually need to use it. Anyone could have taken that. Carol protested. But not everyone has motive for 3 murders, Miss Marple interjected. Mrs. Whitley, Thomas Reed, and Lionel Drake. All 3 threatened your scheme in some way. Furthermore, Poirot continued, you made a crucial mistake. When you rang the bell that night, you told Mrs. Harrow the next day that you had heard it from the Thornton farm. But later, when questioned, you claimed you were too far away to hear it. Why the change in story? Because you realized that admitting you heard the bell placed you closer to the church than your alibi suggested. Dr. Carroll's hands had begun to shake. This is all speculation, he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. And then there is the matter of the paint in the vestry, Poirot said. The red paint from Miss Harrow's paint box. You took it and deliberately left traces, trying to implicate her in Drake's murder. But you made a mistake there, too. You smeared it near the door, where the killer would have entered. But the real killer would have had paint on their hands while handling the communion wine inside the vestry, not by the door. Lastly, Miss Marple said softly, there is your limp, Dr. Carroll. Evelyn saw someone with a distinctive limp approaching the church the night Reed died. That same limp has worn down the left side of the ladder rung in the bell tower, the side a right-handed person with a weak left leg would favor while climbing. The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Carroll looked from face to face, seeing only condemnation. His shoulders sagged. I didn't want to, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. You must believe me. Mrs. Whitley. She was dying anyway. I merely hastened the end, and took what she would have given the church regardless. And with that money, I paid debts from the war, debts that would have ruined me. And the others? Poirot pressed. Reed discovered everything. He was going to destroy me, expose me as a murderer. I couldn't let that happen. I went to the church that night to reason with him, to beg him for silence. But he refused. He said I was a disgrace to medicine, that I would hang for what I'd done. We struggled, and I killed him. It was almost an accident. And Drake, Miss Marple asked quietly. Drake found the pattern in the ledgers. He realized that every patient who had died under my care had left money to the church that never arrived. He was going to announce it publicly. I had to silence him. Carol's face crumpled. And Sarah Whitley, poor Sarah. She came to me asking questions about her mother's death. She was starting to suspect. I gave her an injection, told her it was for her heart. She trusted me. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. 3 murders, 4 if we count Mrs. Whitley. All for money. Not just money, Carol said desperately. Freedom, a life without shame. I served in the war. You know, I saw such horrors. When I came back, I wasn't the same. I made mistakes. Patients died who shouldn't have. The morphine helped me forget, helped me sleep. And then I needed money to pay for morphine to cover my debts. It spiraled out of control. And so you became not a healer but a murderer, Poirot said with quiet contempt. Constable Harris, who had been standing by the door, stepped forward. Dr. Miles Carroll, I'm arresting you for the murders of Thomas Reed and Lionel Drake. You'll be held until the inspector from Scotland Yard arrives. As the constable led Carroll away, the doctor turned back one last time. The bell, he said softly. Thomas Reed was right. It does call the guilty. I've heard it in my dreams every night since I killed him. 12 strokes at midnight. over and over. Perhaps now it will finally be silent. Chapter 8, Aftermath. 3 days later, Miss Marple sat in Mrs. Harrow's garden, enjoying the weak autumn sunshine. The inspector from Scotland Yard had come and gone, taking Dr. Carroll with him to London for trial. The missing ledgers had been found in Carroll House, hidden in his study. The evidence was overwhelming. Hercule Poirot emerged from the vicarage and joined her on the bench. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said, settling himself with his usual precision. "You enjoy the sunshine, yes?" "I do, Mr. Poirot. It's good to see Mournfell peaceful again." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. "Tell me," Miss Marple said eventually, "when did you first suspect Dr. Carroll?" "From the very beginning," Poirot admitted. His story about hearing the bell from 5 miles away. It was a lie that revealed itself immediately. But I had no proof, only suspicion. The candle wax, the cut rope, the modified clock mechanism. Each piece added to the picture. But it was your observation about the ladder rung that sealed it. And you, Mr. Poirot, when did you know? "I suspected from the moment we found the wax. A doctor who makes house calls would carry a lantern, not a scented candle. But Carroll needed the candle to frame Mrs. Ellery, to create another suspect. He stole it weeks in advance, planning every detail. Except he couldn't plan for Thomas Reed's meticulous notes, or for Lionel Drake's persistence," Miss Marple observed. "Pride and fear make people careless." "Indeed, and now justice will be served." Mrs. Harrow appeared with tea and cakes. "I still can hardly believe it," she said, settling into a chair. "Dr. Carroll seemed such a good man. He delivered half the babies in this village, tended the sick through the influenza epidemic. How could he become such a monster?" "The war changed many men," Miss Marple said gently. "And morphine addiction is a terrible thing. It doesn't excuse what he did, but perhaps it helps us understand how a healer became a killer." "The ledger showed 7 elderly patients over 5 years," Poirot added. "All died under suspicious circumstances. All had promised bequests to the church that Carroll intercepted. In total, nearly £1,500. Blood money," Mrs. Harrow said with shudder. "Will the families be compensated?" "The Crown will seize Carroll assets," Poirot explained. "What remains after legal fees will be distributed to the victims' families. It won't bring back the dead, but it is something." Arthur Blaine joined them, looking healthier than he had in days. "I've just come from the church," he said. "The new vicar, the diocese is sending someone to replace Reverend Clare, wants me to continue as verger, and they're going to cast a new bell. The old one, they say, has too much darkness in its history." "What will happen to Reverend Clare?" Miss Marple asked. "He's resigned," Blaine said, "gone to a monastery in Scotland to, as he put it, seek forgiveness for his cowardice. He blames himself for Reed's death. He was weak, not evil," Poirot observed. "He thought he was protecting his parish by silencing Reed. Instead, he made it possible for a murderer to strike. It is a harsh lesson in the cost of moral compromise." Beatrice Ellery appeared at the garden gate, looking hesitant. Mrs. Harrow waved her in. "Please, Beatrice, join us. You're among friends." The organist sat down gratefully. "I wanted to thank you both," she said to Poirot and Miss Marple. "If you hadn't uncovered the truth, I would have lived under suspicion for the rest of my life. The whole village thought I'd killed Thomas Reed out of shame. Your love for Canon Harrow was innocent," Miss Marple said kindly. "There's no shame in finding comfort with a lonely man. Reed's judgment was harsh and uncharitable. Reed was right about the sins in this village, Beatrice said quietly, "Just not about mine. I've been thinking. Perhaps I should leave Mournfell, start fresh somewhere else. Or stay and help this village heal," Mrs. Harrow suggested. "They'll need your music, Beatrice, especially now." The conversation turned to lighter matters. The approaching winter, plans for the church's restoration, gossip about other villages. Evelyn Harrow joined them, having decided not to return to London just yet. She had begun painting the village scenes, she said, finding inspiration in the ancient stones and the ever-present mist. As afternoon faded to evening, Poirot and Miss Marple took a final walk through Mournfell. They paused by the churchyard, where Thomas Reed's grave now bore a simple stone marker. "He was a difficult man," Miss Marple said, reading the inscription. "Thomas Reed, faithful servant of St. Bartholomew's, may he rest in peace. Obsessive, judgmental, perhaps even a bit mad, but he was also honest and brave. He died trying to expose evil. In the end," Poirot said, "that is what matters, not how we are perceived, but whether we stand for truth when it would be easier to look away." Reed could have ignored what he saw. Reverend Clare wished he had. But Reed chose justice, even at the cost of his own life. They stood in silence as the first stars appeared overhead. The church tower rose against the darkening sky, solid and enduring. "The bell will ring again some day," Miss Marple observed. "A new bell with a new voice. Perhaps this time it will call people to joy rather than judgment. Or perhaps," Poirot said with a slight smile, "it will simply mark the hours, as any sensible bell should do. Sometime, mademoiselle, the best we can hope for is normalcy." "You don't believe that, Mr. Poirot?" "No," he admitted, "I do not. But it is a pleasant fiction, is it not?" They walked back to the vicarage together, the last light fading from the western sky. Behind them, St. Bartholomew stood silent, its bell mute, its secrets finally revealed. Epilogue, 6 months later. Spring had come to Mournfell, transforming the village from a place of gray stone and mist to one of green gardens and bright flowers. The new vicar, a cheerful young man named Father William Hayes, had brought energy and hope to the parish. Miss Marple received a letter from Mrs. Harrow in late April. "Dearest Jane, I thought you'd like to know that Mournfell is quite transformed. The new bell was installed last month. It has a beautiful, clear tone, nothing like the ominous toll of the old one. Father Hayes blessed it with prayers for peace and healing. Arthur Blaine has been made head verger and is training 2 young men from the village in church maintenance. He's become quite the leader, actually. All that grief and guilt have been channeled into purpose. Beatrice Ellery is still our organist, and her music has never been lovelier. She's begun teaching piano to the village children and seems quite content. The scandal of her friendship with my brother has been forgotten in light of larger tragedies. Evelyn has decided to stay permanently. She's rented a cottage near the harbor and is making quite a name for herself painting coastal scenes. She seems happier than I've ever seen her, and best of all, her beastly former fiancé has given up trying to contact her. The distance and her newfound confidence have freed her at last. As for poor Dr. Carroll, his trial was held in March. He was found guilty on 4 counts of murder and sentenced to hang. They say he went to his fate calmly, almost with relief, as though death was a forgiveness he'd been seeking all along. The village has established a memorial fund in Thomas Reed's name to support the bell tower's maintenance. It seemed fitting somehow. He loved that tower and that bell, despite how it was ultimately used against him. Mr. Poirot wrote to me last month, saying he'd been called to investigate a matter in Egypt. I do hope he keeps himself safe. Such a brilliant mind should not be wasted on desert adventures. You must come visit us again when the weather improves. Mournfell in spring is quite beautiful, and I promise you, no murders this time. With much love, Letitia. Miss Marple smiled as she folded the letter. She was glad Mournfell had found its peace. The village had been tested by darkness and had emerged stronger for it. She thought of Thomas Reed and his obsessive pursuit of truth, of Dr. Caro and his descent into evil, of all the small secrets and large sins that had tangled together on that stormy November night. In the end, justice had prevailed, not through divine intervention or ancient curses, but through careful observation and logical deduction. The bell had rung at midnight, but it was human hands that had pulled the rope, and human hands had ultimately brought the guilty to justice. As for Hercule Poirot, she had no doubt he was solving some impossible mystery in Cairo or Luxor, bringing his little gray cells to bear on another case. Perhaps their paths would cross again someday. She rather hoped they would. Miss Marple set aside her correspondence and picked up her knitting. Outside her cottage window, St. Mary Mead drowsed in the afternoon sun, peaceful and prosaic. But she knew better than most that evil could lurk anywhere, in the most ordinary village, behind the most respectable facade. One had only to look and to see what was really there. The needles clicked rhythmically. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, for pleasant chimes, marking nothing more sinister than tea time. And that, Miss Marple reflected, was as it should be. Author's note. The bell rang at midnight is a tribute to the golden age of detective fiction, when mysteries were puzzles to be solved through observation, deduction, and understanding of human nature. Agatha Christie's two greatest detectives, Hercule Poirot and Miss Jane Marple, represented different approaches to justice. Poirot with his emphasis on method and psychology, Marple with her deep understanding of village life and human weakness. In bringing them together for this case, I want to honor both their unique talents and the atmospheric, twist-filled style that made Christie the undisputed queen of crime. The isolated English village, the circle of suspects, the red herrings, and the final revelation, all are hallmarks of her finest work. The bell itself serves as both symbol and mechanism, a reminder that even in our superstitions and fears, there is usually a rational explanation. And yet, as Poirot might observe, the truth is often stranger and darker than any legend. Thomas Reed heard the bell calling the guilty in his dreams. In the end, it was not supernatural judgment, but human justice that answered his call. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Not that evil exists, but that ordinary people find the courage to oppose it. The fog may have lifted over Mournfell, but somewhere in another quiet village, another secret waits to be uncovered. Another bell tolls in the darkness, and somewhere detectives like Poirot and Marple continue their eternal vigil, watching, waiting, and seeking the truth that lies hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. For as Miss Marple often observed, human nature is the same everywhere. And where there are humans, there will always be mysteries to solve. The end.